Good day, everyone. This is Mark Vello, and you're listening to Headline News. The epidemic in the United States worsened to more than 3 million new cases in 13 days. The outbreak of the coronavirus in the United States is worsening as variants of this CCP virus spread around the world. Data from Johns Hopkins University shows that between January 1st and 13th, 2021, more than 3 million people were newly affected in 13 days across the U.S. On January 12th, 4,327 people died across the country, hitting another one-day high. California and Texas have had the worst outbreaks. By comparison, when the first case of the CCP virus or coronavirus appeared in the United States, it took 167 days. From January 22nd to July 8th, 2020, when 3 million infections were first reported. Statistics also show that as of 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, Thursday, January 14th, more than 93 million people worldwide have been infected with the CCP virus, and more than 2 million have died from the infection. Of those, over 23.7 million cases have been confirmed in the United States, with over 397,000 deaths. According to the forecasts of the COVID-19 deaths released by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, CDC, on January 13th, the number of deaths from infection in the United States will reach 440,000 to 477,000 by February the 6th, with the epidemic continuing to worsen severely throughout the entire Sunbelt region up to the Mid-Atlantic and northeastern United States. The CDC says the number of single-day deaths in the U.S. has risen sharply in the past 2.5 months, and that the country is in the deadliest phase of the outbreak. Even as the vaccine is being rolled out, new infections are averaging nearly 250,000 cases a day. On January 13th, researchers in Ohio claimed that they identified 2 new variants of the CCP coronavirus that may have originated in the U.S. One of the variants emerged in late December and early January, and within 3 weeks spread rapidly to become the dominant strain in Columbus, Ohio. We know this shift didn't come from the UK or South African branches of the virus, said Dr. Dan Jones, Vice Chairman of the Division of Molecular Pathology at Ohio State University. Jones added that researchers believe it's likely more contagious based on how quickly it spread over the past few weeks. In its report on January 3rd, the White House Coronavirus Task Force said, "This acceleration suggests there may be a U.S. variant that has evolved here, in addition to the UK variant that is already spreading in our communities and may be 50% more transmissible." The report also warned that the virus is set to return in full force in nearly all metropolitan areas and called for aggressive action by communities. Senator Cotton. Senate has no constitutional authority to impeach former president. Senator Tom Cotton said on January 13th that the Senate lacks constitutional authority to conduct impeachment proceedings against President Donald Trump once he leaves office. The Senate lacks constitutional authority to conduct impeachment proceedings against a former president. The founders designed the impeachment process as a way to remove office holders from public office, not an inquest against private citizens, Cotton said in a statement. Cotton says he'll oppose another Senate impeachment trial after Democrats in the House of Representatives, joined by 10 Republicans, voted this week to impeach President Donald Trump for a second time in a 232 to 197 vote. 197 other House Republicans also oppose impeachment. The impeachment, accomplished in a single 7-hour session, was the fastest in U.S. history. It's also the first time in the nation's history that a president has been impeached twice. The single article of impeachment alleges that the president incited an insurrection that resulted in the breach of the U.S. Capitol on January 6th. Republicans criticized the rush, arguing that it offered no due process to the president and no confidence in the proceedings to the American people. Democrats justified the truncated process by alleging that Trump poses a danger to the nation every day he's in office. We know that the President of the United States incited this insurrection, this armed rebellion, against our common country, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi claimed. He must go. He is a clear and present danger to the nation that we all love. Every Democrat voted in favor of impeachment. Cotton also argued that the Senate wouldn't be able to conclude an impeachment trial before January 20th, when President-elect Joe Biden is set to be sworn into office. The House has passed an article of impeachment against the president, but the Senate, under its rules and precedents, cannot start and conclude a fair trial before the president leaves office next week, he said. Cotton condemned last week's violence that transpired as some rioters and protesters decided to unlawfully enter the Capitol building as the majority of Trump supporters rallied outside. Following the outbreak of violence, Trump took to Twitter to call on protesters to go home in peace. He denounced the violence as a heinous attack that defiled the seat of American democracy on January 7th. Cotton said, "There is no grievance that is a fit object of redress by mob law." Those words are as true today as when Abraham Lincoln spoke them. As I said last summer when mob violence gripped our streets, so I say again about the mob violence at our nation's capital last week. Those persons responsible should be held accountable in the courts to the full extent of the law. Fidelity to the Constitution must always remain the lodestar of our nation. He said that's why he opposes impeachment proceedings against a former president. The 10 Republicans who voted to impeach the president were Representatives Liz Cheney, John Katko, Adam Kinzinger, Fred Upton, Jamie Herrera Beutler, Dan Newhouse, Anthony Gonzalez, Tom Rice, David Vallado, and Peter Meyer. And Cheney, as the number 3 Republican, is also strongly criticized for her inability to speak out for the Republican Party's idea. Trump issues another statement to strengthen the ban on U.S. companies investing in the Chinese Communist military. President Trump issued an amended statement on Wednesday, January 13th, that further prohibits U.S. investors funding or companies affiliated with the Chinese Communist Party military. The statement notes that the CCP is using U.S. funds to modernize its military and intelligence systems, which poses a direct threat to U.S. forces on the mainland and overseas. In his new statement, President Trump wrote that Executive Order 13959, which he announced on November 30th, 2020, essentially prevents the handling of securities, either directly or indirectly, from assisting any CCP military company. This is because the CCP's military-civil fusion strategy is using its civilian companies to support the development and modernization of its military and intelligence agencies. While the companies look private and civilian on the surface, the CCP military-related companies directly support the CCP's military, intelligence, and security agencies, and are assisting in their development and modernization. Under the amended executive order, the Trump administration prohibits U.S. investors from purchasing securities of these companies 1 year after they are identified as Communist Party military or military-linked companies. It also allows the U.S. Secretary of Defense to release the names of these companies to the public without notification. Under the executive order, Communist Party-controlled companies raise funds by selling securities to investors with whom they deal publicly, both in the United States and abroad, or by lobbying U.S. investors and foundations to include those securities in the commodities traded, or by other methods to secure their access to U.S. funds. The executive order states that in this way, the Chinese Communist Party is exploiting U.S. investors to finance the Communist Party's military development and modernization. In turn, the CCP's military and intelligence and security agencies pose a direct threat to U.S. forces at home and overseas through the development and deployment of weapons of mass destruction, advanced conventional weapons, and malicious cyber operations against the United States. As a result, the U.S. government prohibits U.S. investors from publicly purchasing securities, derivative securities, or securities to finance any CCP military or CCP military-linked companies. President Trump also noted in the executive order that the U.S. Department of Defense has either legally listed or will soon list these CCP military companies, and the U.S. Secretary of the Treasury will identify their subsidiaries under similar provisions. This concludes tonight's broadcast. Thank you for your time, and stay tuned for the next Headline News.